Possibly one of the most creative weapon mods for Fallout 4 has just released, and we're going to be talking about it quite a bit today. We're checking out what's known as the Select Power Bow by Her. Now, Her is known for crazy and original ideas, and this one is no different. The mod might seem simple at first, a pretty big bow and arrow, but this is a bow and arrow designed specifically for use in power armor, which, when you think about it, kind of makes sense. A bow that has really heavy strings with really heavy projectiles that can only be used when you have the combined strength of you in power armor. And when you try to use this thing outside of power armor, it just doesn't really work. A little bit more on that in a little bit. This mod consists of a surprisingly customizable unique bow along with a generic version of said bow. It has some new mechanics that aren't really present in other mods, something that kind of sets a precedent for the future that I think is really cool. Now, the Select Power Bow is a one-of-a-kind bow that you're going to have to go track down in order to use it. The Select Power Bow itself, the unique that is going to be found over in the Glowing Sea. If you head over to the sunken parking garage over next to the Super Duper Mart, you'll find this unique bow, along with a nice little interaction picking it up. Once you have unlocked this bow, or grabbed it for yourself for the first time, you will now have a recipe at the chemistry station to make more of these. Now, there is a notable difference. This unique version is known as the Select Power Bow. All the other ones will just be known as Power Bows, and that will result in a couple of things, most notably a much different damage output. The unique bow is going to have a much higher damage than the Power Bows, and I think that's pretty interesting. Her has always done this kind of integration where there is one-of-a-kind uniques, and then once you grab it, you can craft more of it. I like the idea that the unique is still more powerful and worth having over the ones that you craft. I think that's a really cool way to integrate it if you're not going to do standard leveled lists. Now, this weapon also has some fun features like different ammo types that have an ammo switcher. This includes some pretty standard bolt types as well as some big heavy ones like rebar bolts, which are just huge chunks of metal, and some other fun ammos as well. Some of these are also retrievable from enemies, so if you shoot one, you can actually go and grab it off of their body, or if you hit a wall, you can pick it up out of there as well. When you pick up that power bow, like I said, it'll unlock the crafting recipe for the new weapon, but it'll also unlock recipes for all of the various bolts that you can craft to use as ammo, so that's fun as well. And whenever you pick up this weapon, it will also give you the aid item, which will allow you to switch all of these bolts, which you can, of course, assign to a hotkey as well. So on the fly, you can press a button and switch out which ammo types you wish to be using. Keep in mind, though, you are going to need that specific ammo type in order to use it. So if I only have one type of bolt and I go to switch the ammo over the ammo switcher, only that bolt is going to appear, so I won't be able to do anything. These are actually real ammos that will be swapped on the fly. It's not something that's kind of fake or weird in the attachment system. A really interesting note about this weapon is obviously it has custom animations for both first and third person because it is going to be a bow and arrow. There's not really anything you can use in vanilla for that. But also, it has full sets of power armor animations since this is designed for power armor, but on top of that, it also has full sets of animations for super mutants. Now, the really interesting thing is that power armor and super mutants are the intent of this mod. You can use it if you're not in power armor or you are just a normal human, but it is intended for power armor and super mutants. And the way that that is shown is this mod actually features strength requirements. We have seen people toy with the idea of strength requirements in the past, but nothing too crazy. This is something I've been wanting for a very long time, and something I wanted to implement in my own mods, but I just never knew how to do it. In the past games, there were strength requirements for weapons. If you weren't strong enough, you couldn't use heavy weapons like a minigun or a missile launcher. This mod implements it in a way that I would consider to be the correct way. If you are in power armor, or you are a super mutant, you can use this weapon with 100% power output. It works correctly. If you are not in power armor, and you are a human, and you have a strength of 10 or more, which is the maximum, by the way, you only get 75% of the power output. To use this thing at full efficiency, you actually have to be in power armor. There is no way around that. But if you are at full strength and you don't want to use power armor, you can still use this thing relatively effectively with 75% of the damage. If you have between 7 and 9 strength, you can use this bow at 50% damage. And if you have 6 or less strength, you cannot use the bow. Period. I think that is such an interesting way to integrate this thing into the game. It's so cool that it actually rewards people for wanting to use power armor or have high strength in a way that is very exclusive. A very cool way to make a build actually matter. Because in Fallout 4, personally, I feel like the builds just aren't as important as they were in the past games. Overall, a super cool, unique way to approach a bow like this, but there is more to talk about. We should head over in-game, start talking about the different animations available, as well as some of the other fun features, including a ton of customization available over at the Weapons Workbench, which you wouldn't really expect for a bow like this, but this mod actually does have it. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So here we are in-game with the Select Power Bow. This is the unique version, the standard version, weirdly enough, not the duplicate version that you can craft. This thing has increased damage, and it refills your action points on critical hits, so this is actually a pretty decent VATS weapon, and I might recommend that if you're trying to use it in third person or against really quick enemies, because it can be hard to lead the projectile. This thing has a base damage of 308 with all of these standard attachments this thing came with when I picked it up out in the world. It fires the standard bolts that come with this mod, has a fire rate of 5, a range of 107, an accuracy of 70, a weight of 20.2 pounds, because this thing is massive. It may not look like it in this menu here because there's not really anything to use for scale, but trust me, this thing is huge. And it has a value of 654 caps because this is the unique variant. This thing actually does have a pretty good damage output. It's one-shotting most of the late-game raiders I encountered, though it might take a bit more after that. And one thing I forgot to mention in the preamble is I do just love the idea of a Fallout hunter-gatherer. Somebody in power armor using a gigantic, ridiculous bow designed for power armor, hunting down big game like Deathclaws. Something that you just kind of need to adapt to in the Wasteland, I suppose. A little look at what the standard power bow can look like, though, with a tiny bit of modifications. Nothing too crazy, nothing that's going to change the damage too much. You'll see that we have a damage output of 200 instead of the pretty whopping 300 and so on. It's a little bit lighter with some of the attachments I have, but for the most part, it's going to be relatively the same with the stats that matter. You just get a kind of look at what you're going to be dealing with. It is still effective, but you'll notice a huge difference between using a generic bow without power armor versus using the select bow with power armor. The damage output is going to be pretty significant. Now then, let's talk animations, and for once, the animation section is going to be a bit longer than usual because we have a few animation sets to talk about. For starters, we'll get ahead look at the standard way that this thing's supposed to be used in first person, in power armor. There's actually a couple of ways that you can fire this thing that you can pick at the Weapons Workbench, but here we have the manual setup. And what that means is when I hold, it will pull back the arrow, and when I release, it lets go. And you can see the amount of force that that thing just put into my target, making it spin pretty dang rapidly. This thing is very, very strong and very cool. Now there is an automatic version which will, instead of having you hold it back like this, when you click it, it just does the entire action for you. But I definitely like having the precise control of being able to use it as I please. Also, you can hear that this thing has custom sounds as well. Now then, this thing also has custom third-person animations, which are very nice. As you aim, you'll fire it, same as usual. Now, it does work the same in that I am holding to pull it back, but it doesn't actually pull it back until I release. A little bit of an interesting quirk with third person, but not too bad to be honest. It just kind of puts a delay on your fire, which is why I kind of like using this thing in first person as my preference. But of course, let's talk about it as a human. As you can see, I have a different stance altogether. I'm actually kind of holding it lower, and this thing is wobbling a bit in my hands because I'm just not in power armor. It's a bit too heavy for me. If I decide to use this thing, well, I can't because my strength is not high enough. So you actually do get an animation that shows you trying, and you just can't really do a whole lot with it. So that's what it looks like if you're not strong enough. Now then, if we set my character's strength to 11, you'll see that this thing has no problem being held. You're not all lowered. It looks like it's actually ready to fire, but you still have a good bit of wobble because, again, this thing is not meant to be used outside of power armor. If I aim with this thing, it still works relatively the same. The animations are pretty dang similar, but a little bit less accurate and a little bit less damage. Still functional, just not at peak efficiency that you would have in power armor. We also have custom animations for third person. This is a really nice position here where you're holding it kind of down to the side, but it still works as it should the same exact way. It just looks a bit ridiculous in the hands of a regular person. This thing is definitely meant for a big fella. Now then, when it comes to the attachments of the Weapons Workbench, we've got some good options here. Starting off with the composition, we have standard, calibrated, tuned, all the way up through advanced. This is basically your quote-unquote receiver. Funny enough, I did all of my footage without ever upgrading this once. I actually used standard composition, and this thing held up fine. If you were to upgrade it fully to advanced, it would get pretty crazy. And what's funny is this thing actually scales with heavy weapons, so that's a pretty interesting thing. When you think of heavy weapons, you don't really think of a bow and arrow, but leave it to Niher to make something cool and unique that kind of breaks the mold. For bolts, we have the standard bolt and the rebar bolt, but there are more options available if you go to the chemistry station and craft more of the ammo types. For limbs, we have the standard limbs, reducted weight limbs, tactical, tactical reducted, compensator, compensator reducted, reinforced, and reinforced reducted if you want to get rid of some of that weight, but also some of the damage. Personally, the reinforced limbs are my favorite in terms of their aesthetic. I think they look really cool, really scrappy, and they fit well with the power armor, I think. We also have some grip sections here. We have the grips for standard, smooth, tactical, and clamp, which all have their own model, which is pretty interesting. And even further, we have the connecting arms, where we have twin bars, bracket, booted, and braced, which will change a very small portion of the gun, or the bow in this case. But they still are there as a customization option. I personally like the bracket here. That's a pretty cool design. We have the option for sights. We have no sight, which you've seen already. We do have an iron sight, which adds a pretty primitive way, but allows you to aim a bit more accurately. And then a couple of reflex sights as well that are mounted right on the side there. We have the option for automated or manual, which I talked about earlier. Automated, you click and it does everything for you. Manual, you will have to hold to fire. And it does change the fire rate slightly, but not really. It just kind of depends on how you want to use this weapon. We do have some material options here, starting off with the limbs. We have standard, blue anodized, bronze, copper, gold, green, gunmetal, iridescent, leather wrapped, leather light wrapped, plastic, red anodized, rusty, select metal, solid steel, wood, and blue wood. So some pretty good options there. Wood actually doesn't look too bad with this setup here, I think. We have a material for the drawstring where you have fabric in blue, black, light gray, green, leather, leather light, red fabric, rubber, and glossy black. Some pretty interesting options there depending on what you like. I usually just stick with the standard. For the material of the grip, we have standard grip material, fabric, ivory, leather, leather light, plastic, rubber, wood, and blue wood. We can also change the color of the connecting arms, a very small part of the weapon, but you can do it. We have the standard, blue, bronze, copper, gold, green, gunmetal, all of the same options we saw for the limbs here. And then there is an accent material for some very small portions of the weapon. In this case, it's really just this small piece here between the connecting arms, but depending on which limbs you choose, there's actually a lot more going on. I know there's definitely some bolts and things that you can choose, but there is standard, blue, bronze, copper, gold, green anodized, gunmetal, iridescent, red anodized, select, steel, wood, and blue wood. So, pretty interesting. Some neat customization. I'm sure you could come up with some really cool looks with the different colors available, as well as the different actual cosmetic changes to the limbs, arms, and grips. A really, really cool weapon. This thing is super unique, very different from things we see on the day-to-day on Nexus. Altogether, a truly fantastic mod. One that I recommend you try out for yourself. This thing is so unique and so interesting. It makes for a great hero weapon and some pretty interesting stuff for even companions. Maybe you want to give one of these to Strong and make him a very, very fun companion to be around. If you want to try this mod out for yourself, it will of course be linked down in the description below. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, consider dropping it a like. It really helps out the channel. And while you're down there, if you like my work and you enjoy what I do here, whether it's the videos I make on YouTube or the mods I make myself on the Nexus, consider supporting me directly over on Patreon. It is linked down there as well. It is, of course, completely optional, not something you should feel like you need to do, but if you're into that kind of thing and you'd like to support me directly, that is the best way to do so. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace!